true calm does not arrive through control. It appears when we stop forcing life to fit our expectations. It's the softness that enters when we finally allow things to be as they are. Take a deep breath now. Feel the cool air entering, the warmth leaving. Find a position that feels like surrender, your body supported, your hands unclenched, your jaw at rest. The stories you'll hear tonight are not steps to follow. They are quiet companions, sitting beside you as the mind learns to loosen its grip. If you feel called, share what you're feeling in this moment or what you hope these stories might help you release. Maybe a burden, a fear, or simply the need to understand. Let each breath be a gesture of release. There is no race to peace. You are already arriving. Now let the story begin. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops, but the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small, round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers, but your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you? The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day, or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he, not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone, so let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper. This moment matters too. The morning mist curled like breath above the water. Dew clung to each blade of grass, and the banyan trees stood tall and patient, their thick roots like ancient hands gripping the earth. In this quiet forest, life stirred slowly. A family of parakeets stretched their wings. Wildflowers opened their sleepy faces to the sun, and by the bend of a river, beneath the shade of a great banyan tree, grazed a herd of deer. Their leader was not the strongest in muscle, nor the swiftest in hoof, but in his eyes was a calm that held the wisdom of many lifetimes. He was the Buddha in a past life. And he was known as the banyan deer. He led not with fear, but with gentleness. When predators lurked, he guided the herd with silence and grace. When floods came, he taught them how to move with the water, not against it. And when food was scarce, he gave the youngest and oldest the first share. Even the wind seemed to part for him. But harmony rarely goes unnoticed for long. Not far beyond the forest, a new king had risen. Young, proud, hungry for grandeur. One morning, as he bathed in a river near the forest edge, a golden mango floated past. He took a bite and paused. The taste was unlike any fruit he had ever known, honeyed, rich, alive. "Where did this come from?" he asked. A servant replied, "From deep in the forest, sire, a grove the deer protect." The king stood. "Then I must have it." With drums and banners, he marched into the trees. His men cleared paths, felled smaller growth, and drove the deer into a vast enclosed reserve. The mango tree was surrounded. The forest taken. The deer were trapped. To amuse himself, the king began a game. Each day, a deer would be chosen to die, for his hunt, for his table, for sport. The deer grew restless. Mothers wept. Fawns shivered in the tall grass. Panic spread like fire. But the banyan deer did not run. He stepped forward and bowed before the king. "Great ruler," he said softly, "let there be order to our suffering. We will offer one deer each day, willing, calm, so the others may live in peace." The king, amused, agreed. A list was drawn. 1 deer per day, alternating between herds. No chase, no screams, just quiet death. And so it went, until one morning, a young doe was chosen. She was from another herd, led by a different chief, but when her turn came, she did not arrive alone. She brought her fawn, still wobbling on its legs, eyes wide, breath quick with fear. The doe knelt before the banyan deer. "I do not come to beg for myself," she said, "but for my child. He cannot feed without me. He cannot yet graze. If I die today, he dies too." She lowered her head. "I ask not for escape, only for time. Let another go in my place, just until he learns to eat." The banyan deer looked at her, then at the fawn, then at the sky, and without a word he turned, walked to the river's edge, and stepped onto the path that led to the palace. The guards, now familiar with his presence, let him pass. The king sat on his marble seat, polishing the tip of his spear. "You again," he said. "What is it now?" The banyan deer bowed low. "I come to take her place." The king raised an eyebrow. "She is not from your herd." "I know." "She is not your responsibility." "She is a mother." The king laughed, then let her king speak for her. "He did not." "And why you?" "Because I can." A silence fell between them. The king studied the deer, the steady breath, the lowered gaze, the quiet strength. "You would give your life for a stranger." "I do not see strangers," said the deer. "Only lives, only suffering, only the chance to spare it." The king leaned back. "Tell me, banyan deer, are you not afraid?" The deer looked up, calm as still water. "I am not afraid to die. I am only afraid to forget compassion." Something shifted in the room, a hush deeper than silence. The king stood, and for the first time in many days, he put down his spear. "No more," he said. "No more blood, no more names drawn, no more quiet lines of sacrifice." He turned to his guards. "Let them go. All of them." That evening, the forest rang with a sound it had not heard in weeks. Joy. Deer ran free beneath the banyan branches. Mothers called their young. The wind moved through the trees without the scent of fear. And at the center of it all stood the banyan deer, watching not with pride, but with peace. In years to come, the king would be remembered as one who changed, not through conquest, but through listening. He had come for mangoes and left with something far sweeter. And the deer who gave up his place without hesitation, he would live on in paintings, in prayers, in stories whispered to children before sleep. Not because he was noble, but because he saw no difference between himself and the one who wept. Because real compassion does not ask, "Is this my problem?" It says, "If it hurts you, it touches me." And in that truth, we are all the same. A monk once asked his teacher, "Master, where does the path to enlightenment begin?" The teacher did not answer. Instead, he stood up, walked across the room, and swept the floor. Later that night, the monk asked again, "Then where does it end?" The teacher looked up from pouring tea and said, "If it ends, it was never the way." This is the story of non-arrival, the path that unfolds not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. Long ago, in a forest monastery, a wandering monk arrived seeking answers. He had studied every scripture, debated with scholars, and meditated in caves for years. And yet, he felt restless, incomplete, as if truth always lived just beyond the next bend. He bowed to the abbot and said, "I have walked many roads. I seek the one that leads to awakening." The abbot nodded and replied, "Very well. Walk with me tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, they walked. Through bamboo groves, past quiet ponds, up rocky trails where mist clung to the earth like breath. They walked all day. The monk said little. By dusk, they had returned to where they started. The monk frowned. "You promised to show me the path." The abbot said, "I did. We walked it." The monk blinked. "But we arrived nowhere." The abbot smiled. "Exactly." The student wanted something linear. A goal, a peak. A moment where the sky split open and declared, "Here it is." But the Dharma is not a destination. It is the walking itself. It is the attention you give to each step, the space between one breath and the next. The Buddha did not climb a holy mountain to reach truth. He sat under a tree and stopped seeking. You do not become awake like winning a race. You remember the truth that was always here. Under the hurry, beneath the striving, inside the stillness of the now. When we think of progress, we think forward. Farther, better, beyond. But what if the path moves deeper, not farther? Inward, not onward. Like returning to the place you began, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The monk eventually understood. He stopped chasing high teachings, stopped measuring his worth by distance traveled. He began to walk slowly. He bowed to doorways, thanked his bowl before eating, washed his feet with care, and in those simple moments, something softened, something opened. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change, but the one doing them no longer seeks to arrive. He is already home. In the end, the way is not mystical. It is making tea without rushing. It is folding robes with full attention. It is greeting the morning with breath instead of thought. And in those everyday movements, the path walks itself. The old abbot left behind a note before his passing. It read, "Those who hurry are carried by illusion. Those who walk with it vanish into the way." The monk later became a teacher. When asked by a student, "Where is the path?" he would only point at the floor beneath their feet. "Here," he'd say. "Now walk." So if you are still searching, still waiting to feel worthy, enlightened, or arrived, pause. Notice your breath. Feel your weight on the earth. Let this moment be enough, because the greatest truth, there is nowhere to get to, and still, you walk. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In the 17th century, Japan was changing. Temples were quiet. Monks walked with their hands folded inside sleeves, heads bowed against the cold wind of politics, poverty, and war. But in Kyoto, a monk named Tetsugen Doko had a dream: to bring the sutras, the sacred texts of the Buddha, to the people. Not locked away in elite monasteries, not spoken only in the high Chinese script of scholars, but printed in Japanese, on paper, so the common farmer, the weaver, the rice merchant, and the child sweeping the temple steps could read the Buddha's words. He would print them, all of them, in woodblock form, an enormous undertaking. Tetsugen began with nothing, no paper, no ink, no press, no woodblocks, just a robe, a bowl, and a vow. So he traveled the countryside, bowl in hand, asking for donations, not for himself, but for the words of the Dharma. At first, people were skeptical. A monk with no monastery, a printing press as a spiritual act. But Tetsugen spoke with quiet conviction. He did not pressure. He did not persuade. He simply bowed and spoke of a dream where truth could be read by all. And slowly, the donations came. Coins, rice, a silver hairpin from a widow, a child's carved flute. One woman brought a single perfect sheet of handmade paper and said, "I cannot read, but may this help someone who can." Years passed. Tetsugen traveled through mountain towns and port cities. He walked in sun, in snow, in silence. The money piled up, not in bags, but in faith, until finally, he had enough. Enough for paper, ink, carvers, labor. The work could begin, but then disaster struck. The Uji River flooded. A great famine swept across the land. Families went hungry. Children cried into bowls of water. And Tetsugen looked at the money he had gathered. He did not hesitate. He gave every coin to relief. Food was bought, homes were rebuilt, the suffering eased, and the printing dream disappeared for a time. When the crisis passed, Tetsugen began again. From zero, bowl in hand, dust on his feet. The same quiet voice, the same calm vow. This time, people gave more quickly. They remembered, they trusted. He gathered enough once more. The press was readied, woodblocks carved. Then, epidemic. A plague swept through Kyoto. The poor collapsed in alleys. Temples turned into infirmaries. And once again, Tetsugen gave all the money away. The third time, he began again. Older now, slower, but steady. His vow never cracked, and after many years, the sutras were finally printed in 7,000 woodblocks, hand-carved and inked with devotion. The first complete Japanese printing of the Buddhist canon. Even today, the blocks are preserved at Obaku Monastery in Kyoto, a monument to patience, to persistence, to presence. But ask a Zen master about Tetsugen's sutras, and they will smile and say, yes, he printed 3 editions, but the first 2 are the most beautiful. Commentary. Zen is not impressed by grand gestures, it is moved by quiet truth. Tetsugen's vow was not to ink, not to paper, but to service. And so, when suffering appeared, he did not cling to his dream. He let it go, not out of failure, but out of deeper practice. The first 2 editions were never printed, but they were lived. Printed in rice, in shelter, in the body of a starving child who lived because of his decision. Printed in the woman who kept her husband another year because Tetsugen paid for medicine instead of woodblocks. Printed in the hearts of strangers who saw that the Dharma is not words, but action. The 3rd edition, that was just the form. The content had already been carved in compassion. Tetsugen teaches us, your vow is not what you say when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you. And in those moments, when your deepest aspiration must bend to the needs of others, that is the real test of the way. We all have sutras we want to print, projects, dreams, a book, a vision, a calling. And often the world interrupts, crisis, illness, family, but Zen does not see this as failure. It sees it as opportunity to offer, to release, to serve something greater than the plan. And when the time is right, you return, you begin again. Because nothing is lost. Each pause is part of the rhythm. Each surrender shapes the heart. Each detour deepens the vow. There is no need to rush. If the heart remains clear, even a delay becomes dharma. Even an interruption becomes a verse. Even a famine becomes a teaching. Tetsugen walked the mountains for decades, but the greatest thing he carried was patience, a faith that giving is not giving up, and that sometimes the invisible sutras are the ones that save us most. In a quiet valley, where mist clung to the morning hills and cranes walked through the wet grass, there lived an old farmer. His hands were rough from years of work, his back bent slightly, not from age, but from reverence for the earth. Each spring, without fail, he would walk into the flooded fields barefoot, carrying a satchel of seeds against his chest. And there, ankle deep in cold water, he would plant each rice seedling by hand. One, then another, then another. Row after row, hour after hour. One morning, a traveller passed by and watched the old man working. "Isn't there a faster way?" he called. The farmer didn't look up. "No." "But can't you just scatter the seeds and let them grow?" The farmer paused, then looked up, his face weathered by sun and time. He held up a single seedling, delicate and green. "If I rush this," he said, "it breaks." And then he smiled. "If I wait, it feeds a village." That is the lesson of the rice seedling. Not speed, not force, but patience. Because some things, especially the most important things, cannot be hurried. They need water, warmth, space, and time. We live in a world that rushes. We want answers now, results now, relief now. But the Dharma, like rice, grows slowly. You sit on the cushion. You breathe. Thoughts rise like insects on the water. You breathe again. Nothing seems to change. But underground, beneath your noticing, something roots itself. Just as the seed splits in darkness before any green breaks the surface. There is a story from the Buddha's life. A man came to him, desperate for wisdom. He asked for enlightenment in a single sitting. The Buddha said, "How long did it take the mango tree to bear fruit?" The man shrugged. "I don't know, a few seasons." The Buddha nodded. "And how many times did you pull at its branches to make it grow faster?" The man blinked. "None. That would harm it." The Buddha smiled. "Then why do you do that to your mind?" A rice seedling cannot be coaxed with impatience. It cannot be screamed into sprouting. It will not bloom on command. But if you plant it, nourish it, protect it from harm, it grows. And when the time is right, it gives back. generously, silently, completely. Patience is not passivity. It is an active trust. It is waking every day to tend what may not show results. It is believing that something unseen is forming, not because of magic, but because that is how life moves. There is another story. A young monk grew frustrated with his progress. He complained to his teacher, "I've been practicing for months. I still feel restless, still distracted, still myself." The teacher led him outside, pointed to the mountain, and said, "You're like someone walking uphill while staring at their feet. You can't see how far you've come because you're only looking at the mud. Growth is rarely visible when it's happening. You notice it in hindsight, in the way you respond to difficulty, in the way you hold silence, in the way you speak a little softer when someone's voice shakes. That is the seedling rising. Sometimes the field floods, sometimes birds eat the first shoot. Sometimes the sun is too strong, and still, the farmer returns. He doesn't uproot everything in frustration. He doesn't curse the seed. He waits. He plants again. Because patience is not about perfect conditions. It's about keeping faith through imperfect ones. Commentary. The rice seedling is not just a symbol. It is a mirror. A reminder that your growth does not need to be dramatic to be real. That your slow, quiet efforts are not wasted. That every time you return to your breath, every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you pause before reacting, you are planting something. And like the farmer, you may not see it today, you may not see it next week, but one day when someone asks how you became calm or kind or steady dash, you'll smile and think of all those unseen days, all those early mornings in the field, all those seedlings that grew while no one was watching. The path is long, but you are walking it, and that is enough. In a quiet village nestled between two rivers, a potter lived alone. He was known not for his words, but for his hands. They shaped the earth with kindness. They moved with rhythm, like a prayer. And every morning before the sun rose, he would mold the same thing, small clay lamps, hundreds of them. He did not sell them. He did not sign them. He left them at doorsteps before dawn, filled with oil, a simple wick resting inside. By evening, the lamps would flicker to life, soft amber lights glowing in windows and shrines, guiding travelers, warming meals, lighting prayers. And no one knew where they came from, only that they came quietly. One day, a monk came to the village. He had heard of this lamp ghost and was curious. He waited outside a hut, said to belong to the potter, and watched the sun rise. Sure enough, the door creaked open. A thin man stepped out, carrying a worn wooden tray of unbaked lamps. He didn't see the monk at first, so the monk bowed and said gently, "Friend, why do you do this?" The potter paused. He looked down at the lamps, then up at the sky just beginning to lighten, and replied, "Because one day I won't be here, but maybe the light will." This is the story of karma and legacy, how what we give quietly endures beyond our body. Commentary. Many people worry about what will remain of them. They build statues, they write books, they name buildings after themselves. But the deepest echoes are often unmarked, like a clay lamp on a doorstep, lit by someone you never met, burning because of your offering. The potter never asked who lit the lamps. never watched them flicker at dusk, never demanded thanks. He just shaped the earth, filled it with light, and left it for the world to use. This is karma in its most graceful form. Not reward, not punishment, but continuation. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle lights another and can light thousands, so the light of one heart can illuminate countless others." We are clay, yes, but we are also the fire. And when this form ends, what burns inside us doesn't disappear. It moves on through kindness passed on, through wisdom shared, through care planted in another's path. The potter died in the winter of his 79th year. He died quietly at home, his hands still stained with red earth. When villagers found him, his workshop was filled with unbaked lamps, dozens of them, lined up like soldiers of light, waiting for dawn. They were fired in his honor and distributed across the village. But something strange began to happen. Even after the lamps ran out, more began to appear, not always the same shape, not always the same clay, but always filled with oil and always left before sunrise. Because a child who had once lit one of his lamps remembered the warmth and made one, then another, then taught a neighbor, and the fire moved on. This is rebirth, not in form, but in impact. You do not need to be remembered, you only need to leave light behind. So ask yourself, what lamps are you shaping? What small lights are you leaving in the world? Not to be praised, but to be used. Because one day, your body will rest. But your lamp may still burn in a window you never saw. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. Long ago, in a kingdom ringed by mountains and temples, a mighty king ruled from a palace of stone and gold. He was feared by his enemies, praised by poets, and followed by thousands. His armies stretched across the land. His wealth filled entire chambers, and his commands echoed through cities like thunder. But still, he was restless. Victory brought no peace. Praise faded quickly. Even sleep, wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt hollow. And so one morning, while gazing out across his kingdom from a marble balcony, the king spoke aloud. "Who in this world is greater than I?" A servant, sweeping quietly nearby, paused. "There is one," he said softly, eyes downcast. The king turned sharply. "Who?" "A sage," said the servant. "He lives alone in the forest, wears no crown, owns no gold. But they say he holds more peace in his silence than all your generals in battle." The king laughed. "A beggar in the woods, greater than me." But something in the servant's voice lingered. And later that night, when the court had gone quiet, the king summoned his best horse and rode out alone. Disguised in simple robes, his face shadowed by the hood of a traveler. He rode for 2 days, through thick jungle, across rivers, past farmers and monks and children who did not bow. Finally, at the edge of a still grove, he saw a small hut beneath a Bodhi tree, and outside it, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, was the sage. No guards, no roof over his head, no possessions, just stillness and eyes that did not flicker when the king approached. "You are the one they speak of?" the king asked. The sage nodded once. "I am one, of many." The king studied him. "You have no palace, no army, no throne, and yet people speak your name in reverence. Why?" The sage said nothing. The silence stretched, long enough for the king to feel his own voice echo. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit. The king hesitated, then obeyed. They sat together under the tree, as the wind moved gently through the leaves. No words, no commands, just presence. After a long while, the king said, "You are not afraid of me." "I see no king," said the sage, "only a man with questions." The king frowned. "I have conquered lands, broken enemies, shaped history. You think I have questions?" The sage met his eyes. "Then why are you here?" The king opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Because beneath the silk, beneath the crowns, beneath the noise, he had come not to test the sage, but to understand something he could not command. Finally, he asked, "Why do people follow you?" "I do not ask them to." "Then why do they listen?" The sage picked up a small stone from the earth, rolled it in his fingers. "They listen," he said, "because I have no need for them to." The king blinked. "I lead armies, command cities, hold power over life and death, but still I'm not content." The sage nodded. "Because you mistake fear for respect, obedience for love, wealth for worth." The king stiffened. "Are you saying I am not powerful?" "I am saying," the sage said gently, "that true power does not cling, it does not shout, it does not fear being forgotten." They sat again in silence. The wind stirred the sage's robe. The king looked down at his hands. "I have everything," he said, "but still I feel empty." The sage smiled. "Then you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To lead without needing to be above." That evening, the king returned to his palace. No fanfare, no declaration, but something had changed. He began to listen more, to speak less, to ask questions instead of giving orders. His advisors whispered about his visits to temples, his long walks alone, his sudden interest in sitting beneath trees without speaking. And when his generals asked, "Who taught you this?" he said simply, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed into silence beneath the same Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of stillness across the land. No work, no speech, just listening. And in time, his own rule became a story of its own, not because he expanded borders, but because he stopped needing to, not because he gained more, but because he learned to let go. And the story of the king and the sage spread like the breeze that once moved through the forest leaves. A reminder that the crown is not the source of power, wisdom is, and the one who does not seek to rule is often the one most worthy to lead. Long ago, in the shadow of the Mahabharata range, there lived a young man named Jorin. He was clever, quick-witted, strong of voice and proud of heart. But Jorin carried something deeper, an anger that lived just beneath his skin, not always cruel, but sharp, like a wind that turned cold without warning. One day, after an argument with his father, Jorin stormed out of their stone cottage and began climbing the mountain trail above their village. "I don't need anyone," he shouted at the trees. But the forest only rustled in reply. He climbed higher until the air turned thin and the path narrowed to rock and dust. At the highest ridge, he stopped and yelled into the vastness below. "I hate you!" The words bounced off stone, and to his surprise, the mountain answered, "I hate you! I hate you!" The echo rang out across the cliffs, his own voice thrown back at him. Jorin blinked. He had never heard the mountains speak before. Curious, he cupped his hands again. "You're a fool!" The echo answered, "You're a fool, a fool." Now he laughed nervously. Then, hesitantly, he tried, "I love you." And again the valley responded, "I love you. Love you." His voice returned, but changed by the silence it passed through. Jorin stood there for a long time, the cold wind tugging at his sleeves, the vastness of the world pressing in. And then he turned back down the path, but quieter than before. This is the story of karma, of how what we send out returns. Commentary. In Sanskrit, karma means action, but not just physical action. Also thought, speech, intention. Each one plants a seed. And those seeds, over time, bear fruit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as response. Like an echo. The mountain did not decide to insult Jorin. It simply returned what was given. This is the truth of karma. The world is not judging you. It is reflecting you. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness follows you, like a shadow that never leaves. Most people think karma is about fate, but it's not. Karma is not what happens to you. It's how you move, and what that movement shapes in return. Jorin didn't change overnight, but that moment on the mountain stayed with him. He began to notice the way his words shaped the people around him, how a harsh joke left someone smaller, how a small kindness lifted a room. He didn't always get it right, but now he listened for the echo. One day, years later, Jorin stood at the base of the same mountain. His son, angry about a broken toy, was shouting at the sky. Jorin placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Careful, little one. The mountain hears." The boy looked up, puzzled, and Jorin smiled. "Speak gently, even when no one answers right away." Because life is an echo. Sometimes it comes back loud, sometimes soft, sometimes years later, sometimes not until your children feel it, but it always returns. So what will you shout into the valley? What kind of world will your words shape? Be mindful of your echoes, because one day you'll hear them again. The scholar arrived at the mountain temple with a scroll under one arm and confidence in his step. He had studied the texts. He had debated sutras with masters across the provinces. He had published writings on logic and perception, emptiness and form. And now, at last, he wished to learn Zen. He was met by the abbot, an old man with tired eyes and steady hands. They sat on floor cushions beneath a wooden beam. The room smelled of old cedar and rain-damp stone. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles. The abbot said nothing. The scholar bowed. "I have come to learn the true meaning of Zen. The abbot smiled and reached for the teapot. He poured and poured and kept pouring. The cup filled, then overflowed. The tea spilled onto the tray, then the floor, pooling around the scholar's sleeve. "Master!" the scholar cried, pulling back. "The cup is full! No more will go in!" The abbot paused, then looked up, expression unchanged. "Exactly," he said. "If your cup is already full, how can I show you Zen?" That was the lesson. No parable, no verse, no philosophy, just tea and the quiet sound of too much. In Zen, this story is often the first told, because so many who come to the practice do so with answers already in hand. Certainties, systems, names for things that have no names. But Zen is not a path of addition. It is a path of subtraction, not filling up, but emptying out, so that what cannot be spoken can finally be seen. Later that evening, the scholar sat alone in the courtyard. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like old dancers in the dark. He touched the wet sleeve of his robe, still stained from the spilled tea. He thought of how much effort he had made, years of memorizing, comparing, analyzing. And now, a cup of tea had undone him. The next morning, he returned to the abbot. He bowed deeper this time. "I will begin again," he said, "but this time I will begin with an empty cup." The abbot simply nodded and poured. In the West, we're taught to value accumulation, of knowledge, of opinions, of success. We believe wisdom is something gained, a kind of mental wealth, stacked neatly in rows. But in Zen, true seeing begins only when the shelves collapse, when we stop trying to name the wind and instead feel it on our skin. The story of the teacup is not just about humility, it's about presence, because most of us don't realize how full we are, not with wisdom, but with noise. Thoughts, fears, comparisons, labels for ourselves, judgments of others. Memories clinging like moss to the walls of the mind, and into that already crowded room, we try to invite truth. But truth is shy. It doesn't enter noise. It waits for silence. Once, a monk asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher picked up a broom and began sweeping, not as metaphor, but as truth. The monk blinked. "I meant the true essence." The teacher stopped, held up the broom, and said, "When your cup is empty enough to see this, then you'll know." The scholar stayed at the temple. He chopped wood, carried water, swept the garden path. He stopped trying to explain Zen and began living it. When thoughts rose, he bowed to them like old friends. When the wind blew, he listened. He stopped speaking about emptiness in essays and began to taste it in his bones. One afternoon, while washing bowls, another visitor arrived, a young academic from the capital, eager, brilliant, hungry for answers. He asked the abbot, "Master, what is Zen?" The abbot reached for the teapot. The scholar, now older and humbler, smiled gently and whispered under his breath, "Careful, your cup is already full." Commentary. We often think that wisdom means knowing more. But in Zen, wisdom is the art of unknowing, not ignorance, but freedom from the clutter of should and must, from the heavy robes of "I already know." To be empty is not to be void, it is to be receptive, to hold space for what arises, without grabbing it, without turning it into a theory. A teacup holds tea because it is empty. A mind holds peace because it is still. You cannot pour into what is already overflowing. You cannot meet truth if you are busy rehearsing your opinions. Zen is not an addition to your bookshelf. It is the moment you set the bookshelf on fire and warm your hands by the flames. There is a cup in all of us. Sometimes it's filled with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes with knowledge we mistake for awakening. But when you're ready, when you truly long for clarity, you will tip that cup, let it spill, and then, and only then, will the tea of the present moment finally be poured. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a tree that stood just beyond the monastery walls, a tall maple. Its leaves flamed gold each autumn, spilling light into the courtyard like scattered coins. Monks often paused beneath it, bowing to its stillness, especially when the season turned. One afternoon in early autumn, a young novice sat beneath the tree troubled. His master had given him a koan to meditate on. What do you cling to that no longer lives? He had meditated, chanted, even fasted, but the answer would not come. That day, the wind had begun its long conversation with the branches. A single leaf, amber at the edges, twirled down, landed softly in the novice's lap. He stared at it. Fragile, veined, no longer green, still beautiful, but no longer living. The tree gave no sign of loss. No grief, no clinging, only release. Another leaf drifted down, then another. The novice looked up. The tree was letting go of what had once been its crowning glory. Not with sorrow, but with grace. Later, he spoke with his master. Why does the tree drop what once gave it life? The master replied, because it trusts the cycle. It knows spring will come again. It makes room by releasing. The novice thought of the things he had held too tightly, a grudge from a harsh word, a dream that had withered, an idea of who he should become. He returned to the tree the next day, sat beneath it again. This time, when a leaf fell into his hand, he whispered, "Thank you," and let it go. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Letting go is not loss, it is returning." As the days grew colder, the tree became bare. Some monks said it looked lonely, exposed, but the novice saw strength in that nakedness, a kind of quiet surrender. It was not clinging to what had passed. It was preparing for what would come. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the monastery roofs. The tree stood still, unmoving, uncovered, unconcerned. Months passed, and then, one morning in spring, the novice awoke to find tiny buds on the tree's limbs, software green, new. He smiled and understood at last. What we release returns, but only when we've stopped grasping. There is a phrase in Buddhist teaching, you can't receive with a closed hand. The tree had shown this truth. Letting go is not the end. It is the opening. The forest path was dappled with golden light. Shafts of sun fell through the tall teak trees, casting long shadows that shifted with the breeze. A group of monks walked quietly, their feet bare on the earth, their minds turned inward. They had been traveling for 2 days now, through fields, across shallow rivers, under wide skies that watched without comment. And ahead of them, seated on a smooth, flat stone beside a trickling stream, was the Buddha. He was waiting, not impatiently, but as a mountain waits for the wind. The monks approached and bowed. Some sat, others stood, resting their walking sticks against the roots of a banyan tree. One among them, Ananda, had seen something on the road that troubled him. A farmer's son had been bitten by a snake. He had seen the child cry out, flailing in fear and pain. The boy's wound could be treated, but the panic, the despair that had settled in his eyes lingered in Ananda's heart. And so he asked, "Blessed One, why do some suffer more than others, even when the wound is the same?" The Buddha turned to him gently and answered with the story. "Imagine," he said, "a man walking through a quiet field. The day is calm, the air is warm, and then," he raised his hand, "an arrow strikes him." The monk stirred slightly. He gasps in pain. The wound is deep. The arrow has pierced his flesh. He clutches at it. This, Ananda, is the first arrow. He paused. But then, the Buddha's voice softened, deepened. Then the man grows angry. "Why me?" he cries. "What have I done to deserve this?" He curses the heavens. He blames the gods. He weeps not only for the pain, but for the story of the pain. He looked slowly at the circle of listeners. "That is the second arrow." Some monks frowned slightly, as if trying to follow an invisible thread. "The first arrow," the Buddha said, "is the pain we cannot avoid. The body ages. Illness comes. People leave us. We are wounded by life, by loss, by chance." He drew a line in the dirt with his finger. "But the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves." He tapped his chest lightly, with thought, with resistance, with fear, with story. Ananda nodded slowly. "So the suffering comes not only from what happens," he said, "but from how the mind meets it." The Buddha smiled. "Exactly." A young monk, Rahula, tilted his head. "But Lord, if a man is struck by an arrow, how can he not cry out? How can he not fear the pain?" The Buddha's gaze was kind. "He may cry out," he said, "but the wise man does not turn the cry into a prison." He looked at Rahula. "You may feel pain, but you do not have to become pain." The wind rustled through the leaves above them, as if nature itself exhaled in agreement. To feel sadness when a friend dies, that is the first arrow. But to say, "I will never be whole again," or "I should have done more," that is the second. He pointed to the stream beside them. "Water flows. It does not cling to a shape. When pain arises, let it arise. See it, feel it, but do not wrap your identity around it." An older monk, who had once been a warrior, bowed his head. "I have carried many arrows in my life," he said softly. "Not in the flesh, but in memory." The Buddha nodded. "The past is full of arrows we keep alive with thought. The future is full of arrows we imagine before they are even shot. He looked toward the trees. But the present holds only the first arrow, and even that, when seen clearly, passes. A silence followed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. The Buddha let it linger. Then he spoke again. You are not wrong to feel pain. You are not less awakened because you grieve, or ache, or tremble. He gestured to his own chest. This body too has known hunger, illness, sorrow. He placed his hand upon the ground. But when pain comes, I do not build a house around it. I do not say, this is me, this is mine, this is forever. He looked at each monk now, one by one. To awaken is not to avoid arrows. It is to stop shooting the second. Later that evening, as the monks prepared camp near a circle of moss-covered stones, a fire crackled quietly in their midst. Ananda sat with Rahula and the older warrior monk. They said little, but their silence was different now. Not numb, not avoidant, just aware. Rahula watched a moth flutter near the flame and whispered, "Even the fire burns only what touches it." Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes. And in that moment, the Buddha's words drifted across the darkness like a breeze through tall grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second belongs to you. You can choose to set it down. In time, the teaching of the two arrows would find its way into distant lands, distant minds, translated, adapted, retold. Some would call it psychology. Others would call it mindfulness. Some would not give it a name at all. But beneath every version, the truth would remain. Pain is part of life, but suffering is what we build atop it. A story, a wall, a self. But when we learn to pause, to see the first arrow for what it is, and let go of the second dash, then peace returns, quietly, naturally, like a wound that knows how to heal. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so..." "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom. It's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. "All 3 of you are correct," he said, "depending on how you define freedom." He continued, "Most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us." He looked out the open window. "But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances. The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, I failed. There was a pause. One novice finally asked, Then what is the lesson, Master? Shiro replied softly, There are times to steer and times to yield. He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. You cannot hold the wind in your hands, he said, but you can feel its path against your face. He paused, and when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm. The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, carried, yet free. There's a saying in Chan Buddhism. The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass. The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In the heart of the Himalayan foothills, where the clouds hung low and the trees grew tall enough to brush the sky, there lived an elephant unlike any other. He was large, yes, towering and strong. But it was not his size that set him apart. It was his silence, his gentleness, the way he walked through the forest without disturbing a single leaf. The other animals called him Chadanta, though few ever spoke directly to him. They simply watched, from trees, from burrows, from the safety of shadow, as he moved like a mountain in motion. He was the Buddha in a past life. And this is the story of his strength, not in battle, but in sacrifice. Chadanta lived alone by choice. He did not shun the world, but neither did he cling to it. He bathed in still lakes at sunrise. He ate from the same fig tree each day, taking only what he needed. When storms came, he broke branches to shelter smaller creatures. And when conflict stirred among the animals, he was the one they turned to, not for punishment, but for peace. Yet peace often invites jealousy, and far from the forest, deep within a palace carved of stone and silence, a queen sat with bitterness in her heart. She had once lived in that forest, a doe, soft-eyed and quiet, and long ago, when Chadanta had ruled a great elephant herd, she had been among them. She had loved him, deeply, without condition, but he had never looked her way, never spoken her name, never returned what she offered. And so, in her next life, reborn as a queen, she remembered only the wound, and she wanted revenge. She summoned the royal hunter and said, "In the northern forest lives a white-tusked elephant. His hide is pale, his eyes are gold. Bring me his tusks, no matter the cost." The hunter hesitated. It is said that he is gentle, wise. All the more reason, she said, to prove that the gentle can bleed. And so, with blade and bow, the hunter traveled north, through jungle, through rain, through weeks of silence, until he found the clearing near the fig tree. There stood Chadanta, still, listening to the wind. The hunter watched from behind the trees. He waited 3 days, but the elephant did nothing wrong. He did not rage, did not attack, did not falter. Only once did he cry out, and that was when he helped a small bird fallen from its nest. On the 4th morning, the hunter stepped forward. Chadanta turned, and in that moment he knew. He saw the blade, saw the sorrow, saw the karma rising like fog. And yet, he did not move. "You have come for my tusks," he said. The hunter froze. "How did you—" "I remember," Chadanta said. "She was hurt. She never let it go." The wind stirred the trees. The lake nearby rippled. "I will not fight you," he said. "Take what you came for." The hunter lowered his bow. "But I cannot kill you." "Then don't," said the elephant. "I will kneel. You may take the tusks. Spare the rest." And slowly, with the dignity of one who walks willingly toward pain, Chadanta lowered himself to the earth. The hunter wept as he worked, not because the task was hard, but because the elephant never once flinched. When the blade cut deep, he did not cry out. When the ivory came free, he did not recoil. He only said quietly, "May she find peace now." The hunter carried the tusks back to the palace, and when the queen saw them, gleaming, perfect, wrapped in bloodied cloth, she felt no triumph, only weight. She touched them once, and then began to shake, for in that moment her memories returned fully, not of rejection, but of Chadanta lifting a fallen calf, of standing watch while others slept, of refusing to harm a single creature even when threatened. And now, that being had offered his very body. For her. She collapsed, and in her next life, it is said, she returned to the forest as a healer, not to take tusks, but to mend wounds. The story of Chadanta spread far beyond the forest. Monks carved his image into cave walls. Children whispered his name when they felt afraid, not because he was mighty, but because he proved that strength is not in what you strike, but in what you endure for the sake of others. Because true power needs no roar, it needs no armor. It needs only presence and the willingness to give without hatred, even to those who once wished you harm. There was once a young monk who feared change. He feared the end of things, the falling of leaves, the fading of youth, the loss of voices he loved. Every impermanence felt like a theft. And though he studied the teachings, sat each morning in silence, recited the truths of Anika, still, his heart gripped what it knew. One day, he sat with his teacher beneath the open sky. The wind was gentle. The air smelled of dry grass and pine. Above them, clouds drifted, vast and slow, casting soft shadows across the stone. The teacher pointed upward and said, "Look, what do you see?" The monk replied, "A cloud." The teacher nodded. "Now keep watching." They sat for a long while, Minutes passed. Then hours. The cloud changed shape. Then shape again. Then thinned and vanished. The monk frowned. It's gone. The teacher smiled. Number only its shape is gone. Its water is still in the sky, or falling as rain, or becoming mist. It hasn't ended, only transformed. The monk was silent, and something inside him softened. This is the story of impermanence, and the truth that beyond all change, there is a space that never breaks. Commentary. We fear change because we identify with form. We think, I am this body. I am this name. I am this role, this relationship, this belief. And when those dissolve, we feel ourselves dissolve. But the Buddha taught, all compounded things are impermanent. All form changes, but emptiness remains. Emptiness is not void. It is spaciousness, the sky that holds all clouds without being touched by them. The nature of mind is like that. Thoughts arise like weather, bright, stormy, dense, scattered, but the awareness that sees them, it remains untouched, unshaken, vast. When you cry, the sky is not wet. When you laugh, the sky does not echo. And when the self seems to break apart, the sky simply watches. The young monk began to observe things differently. When a flower wilted, he did not mourn its death. He saw its petals return to soil, its stem feed the ants, its color fade into memory. He saw its life ripple onward. He came to understand that nothing truly ends. The cloud becomes rain, the rain becomes river, the river becomes mist, the mist becomes cloud again. So too with us. What we call a self is a cloud, shifting, dancing, dissolving, but never disappearing. And behind it all, the sky waits, not as a place, but as a metaphor for mind, open, unchanging, whole. This is why the Buddha smiled when asked, "What happens after death?" He did not rush to answer, because the question clings to form, and the truth cannot be grasped like a stone. It can only be realized. Like seeing the sky for the first time after years of watching only clouds. The monk later wrote, "My thoughts are not me. My name is not me. I am the space between all that comes and goes." This is not to say life has no meaning. On the contrary, its beauty lies in its movement. Because clouds are only beautiful because they change, and love is precious because it cannot be frozen. So when you feel yourself clinging to a moment, to a face, to a version of yourself long gone, pause, look up, and remember, you are the sky. Everything else is passing weather. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the color of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. "Am I clinging to the Dharma itself?" The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward." The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you." Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide." A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. "I have crossed," he said softly, and the Buddha replied, "Then walk freely." No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. High in the hills above a quiet town, there stood a temple. Its walls were weathered by wind and time, its steps worn smooth by generations of sandals, its prayer flags faded but still fluttering, and in its tallest tower hung a bell. Massive, bronze, perfectly cast. It had been gifted by a distant king centuries ago, carried up the mountain by oxen and monks, polished each year, respected, admired, but never rung, not once. The bell had a name, Resonance of the Mountain. Inscribed around its rim were words in a forgotten tongue. It was said to hold the most beautiful sound ever forged, so pure, so deep, that it would quiet all suffering for a moment. But no one had ever heard it, because the abbot long ago had made a vow: let the bell only ring when the world is ready to listen. And so it waited and waited. Pilgrims climbed the hill just to see it. Children dared each other to touch the rope, but none pulled. It became a symbol of restraint, of mystery, of potential, and eventually, of silence too deep to question. One day, a novice asked the elder monk, "Why don't we ring it?" The monk shrugged. Because it was meant to be rung, but never was. The novice frowned. Then what's the point of its sound? The monk looked out at the horizon and replied, "You tell me." The story of the bell spread like smoke, and in time, people began to wonder how many other bells go unrung, not made of bronze, but of possibility. There was a painter who never showed her art, a musician who kept every song in his notebook, a teacher who knew how to heal but doubted her voice, a young man who wrote letters he never sent, a woman who forgave but never said the words aloud. Each of them had a bell hanging in the tower of their own life, polished, admired, imagined, but never heard. This is the parable of unused potential. The Dharma teaches us about impermanence, yes, but also about urgency, not frantic urgency, but gentle, clear truth. This life will not wait forever, and the sound in you deserves to be shared. The bell was never rung, not because it couldn't be, but because someone was waiting for perfect conditions, for absolute certainty, for a sign. But life rarely gives signs, only moments, and you must choose to meet them. There is a Zen story of a man who stands beside a river. He thirsts, but waits for the perfect reflection to appear on the surface before drinking. He dies with water at his feet. What sound do you carry within you? What truth, what offering, what kindness left unsaid, what creation unwritten, what forgiveness unopened? Letting your bell ring does not require a crowd. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true and shared. One evening, a new abbot arrived at the temple. She had studied the bell's history, had bowed to it many times. And then, one spring morning, as the valley bloomed, she climbed the tower and pulled the rope. The sound that followed was not loud, not shocking, but profound. It rolled through the mountains like a low tide. Clear, mournful, joyful, full. Birds rose into the air. Monks paused mid-step. Villagers lifted their heads from bowls and windows. And in that moment, everything was still. Not because they heard something new, but because they heard something they had always carried inside. Then the bell was silent again. But something had changed. The abbot later said, "A bell is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be heard. And so are we." Commentary. This parable asks a quiet but urgent question. What are you holding back? Not out of wisdom, but out of fear. The sound in you may not end suffering. It may not change the world, but it may change a moment. It may reach one person. It may free your own breath, and that is enough. We often wait for permission, for clarity, for mastery, for the right time. But the bell does not ask, "Will I be understood?" It asks, "Will I be true?" The world is filled with unwritten books, unsung songs, unspoken love, unrung bells, and it is not failure to stay silent, but it is loss of what could have been shared, loss of what someone else needed to hear, even if only once. You don't have to shout. You don't have to perform. You just have to let your voice exist, to let the truth you carry move from silence into air. So ring your bell, tell your story, share your art, speak your heart, forgive, laugh, cry, begin again. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if no one claps, let the sound live outside of you. Let it ripple. Let it go. Because a silent bell may be beautiful, but only a ringing bell is alive. The forest lay still beneath the afternoon sun, warm and golden, its edges softened by the hush of tall grass and the rustle of distant leaves. Along a winding riverbank, deer moved like whispers, elegant, careful, serene. They drank from the clear water, nibbled the green shoots, and lifted their heads with ears poised to catch the smallest sound. Among them walked a deer, unlike the others. Tall, golden brown, with a coat that shimmered like silk, and eyes that held not fear, but understanding. He was the Buddha in a life long before his final birth. And he was known as the king of the banyan deer. In this forest, two great herds lived side by side, the banyan deer and the branch deer. Each herd had its king, but only one ruled with wisdom and mercy. The king of the banyan deer cared for his herd as a father cares for his children. He ensured the weakest were protected. He shared shade and water with all. And when conflict stirred, he calmed it with reason, never violence. But far beyond the forest, beyond even the river's reach, sat a palace of polished stone. There lived a human king, powerful, proud, and enamored with the hunt. He loved the thrill of the chase, the cries of hounds, the clatter of hooves, the fall of the body. But he grew tired of riding so far for the kill. And so one day he declared, "Let the deer be driven into the royal park. I will hunt them there at my leisure." His men rode into the forest, scattering the herds. Mothers called for fawns. Hooves pounded through brush and mud, and by force, fear and fire, hundreds of deer were herded into the park's high-walled grounds. The king of the banyan deer and the king of the branch deer were among them. The hunt began. Each day, the human king would enter the park and fire his arrows. The deer ran. Many fell. The others huddled in dread, knowing not who would die next. So the two deer kings came together. "This cannot go on," said the banyan deer. "Too many suffer. Too many die. There must be a way to spare the herd greater agony." The branch deer narrowed his eyes. "You would deal with the hunter?" "No," said the banyan deer. "I would speak to the man." That night, while the moon hung low and silent, the banyan deer stood at the gates of the palace. The guards laughed at first until they saw his eyes. They led him in, and the next morning, the king, amused by the boldness of the creature, agreed to listen. "You are brave to come," he said, "but also foolish. Speak, and I may spare you, or I may make a rug of your hide." The deer bowed his head, not in fear, but in respect. "My lord," he said calmly, "your arrows fall without pattern. The deer live in terror. Let there be order. Each day we will offer one deer willingly. No chase, no cruelty. Just one life, given so the rest may live without panic." The court gasped. The king blinked. "You would offer your own kind?" "To save many, yes." The king, impressed by this wisdom, agreed. And so it was that each day, one deer came forward, chosen in turn, first from the branch deer, then from the banyan deer. There was no fleeing, no screaming, only quiet surrender. But one morning, the chosen deer did not come. Instead, a young doe, trembling thin, appeared at the palace gate, her eyes wide with grief. "My lord," she whispered, bowing low, "today was my husband's turn, but I have just birthed a fawn. If I die today, it will surely perish." She wept softly. "Please, let me live just a little longer. Let someone else take my place. Let me nurse it just until it walks." The king said nothing. He looked at his ministers, at his guards, at the doe crouched low and shaking. Then he said, "No, the order is the order. You must go." The deer turned her head to hide her sobs. But before the guards could move, a shadow stepped into the courtyard. Tall, still, golden, the king of the banyan deer. "I will take her place," he said. The king frowned. "But it is not your turn. She is from the branch deer herd." "I do not care," said the banyan deer. "A life is a life, and compassion does not ask about herd or rank." The court fell silent. The deer turned to the doe and lowered his head. "Go, raise your child." The human king stood, his face unreadable. "You would die for one not your own, for one you do not even know." "Yes," the deer said, "because I do know her. She is like me. She feels fear. She loves her child, and I will not let her weep alone." The king sat back down slowly. No one spoke. And then, with a deep breath, he looked to the sky above. What kind of creature gives his life for another? The deer said simply, "One who understands that all life is the same." The king rose. "No more," he said. "No more killing. No more hunting. Not here. Not in the park. Not in the forest." He turned to his court. "Let the gates be opened. Let them go free." And so it was. The deer returned to the wild. The herds rejoined. The mother nursed her child beneath the whispering trees. And the king of the banyan deer stood once more at the edge of the river, watching, not for enemies, but for peace. In time, the story spread, told around fires, carved into temple walls, painted in soft colors across ancient scrolls. And always it bore the same lesson. To speak truth to power is rare. To speak with compassion is rarer still. But to do both without fear, even to your own risk, that is the mark of true nobility. Even in a deer, even in a forest, even when the one you face holds arrows and gold. Because courage is not always loud. Sometimes it bows low. Sometimes it says, "Let me go instead." And sometimes it changes the heart of a king. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery, where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at two saplings growing side by side. "These trees," he said, "were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives." The students blinked. "They look the same," said one. The sage only smiled. "Wait." And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them, sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it, but its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped, its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows. But sometimes, what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins at the edge of the mountain forest where the temple path bent towards silence. There lived a colony of ants beneath a wide, flat stone. To most monks, it was just a rock on the side of the trail. But to the ants, it was the roof of a world of tunnels and chambers, of stored seeds and guarded queens, of tiny legs moving in rhythm beneath the earth. They worked, they mended, they gathered, they survived, unseen, unpraised, undisturbed, until the mountain shook. It began with a low grumble, like the belly of the earth remembering something old. Then a crack, then a roar. A section of rock above the temple broke free, and in seconds, an avalanche thundered down the slope. Snow and stone and dust and gravity all rushing as one. The monks ran, the birds scattered. The temple bell rang once, then went silent. And when the cloud of debris settled, the stone beneath which the ants had lived was gone, buried, crushed. Their world had vanished. The next day, the monks gathered to assess the damage. The outer wall had cracked. The bell tower was tilted, and one small section of the trail had collapsed. Master Ijo, the head abbot, stood quietly at the edge of the forest. In his hand, he held a small wooden stick. He traced lines in the dirt, not of buildings or repairs, but of ant trails. A young monk approached. "Why are you drawing ants, master? The path is gone." Ejo looked up. "And so are they." The novice tilted his head. "But they were just ants." Ijo said nothing. He continued drawing, slow circles, intersecting lines, paths that led nowhere, and then returned again. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me, young one, what is the measure of significance?" The novice hesitated. The size of the impact? The importance of the being? Ijo tapped the ground. To a tree, the ant is nothing. To the ant, the tree is everything. That evening, Ejo gave his Dharma talk outdoors. He spoke of the ants, of how their lives had been full of purpose, though invisible, of how they had labored in silence, built with precision, and lived with instinctual harmony. No one carved a statue in their name, he said. No one chanted sutras for them. But they lived as truthfully as any monk, and now they are gone. One monk asked, "Is that not the way of samsara?" Ejo nodded, "But we must not let that truth become callousness. Impermanence should make us more tender, not more numb." Over the next few days, Ejo began collecting small stones from the mountainside. He stacked them in a circle on a flat patch of earth. No plaque, no incense, just a ring of quiet. When asked what it was, he replied, "A shrine to the unnoticed." A week later, a new trail was cleared, and along the side of it, a sign was posted. "Step with awareness. Even the smallest lives walk beside you." That winter, a visiting scholar arrived at the temple. He noticed the shrine of stones and asked what god it honored. The monks smiled. "Not a god," they said, "a purpose. Ijo later explained to him over tea. We all wish to be mountains, to be remembered, to be seen from afar. He set his cup down gently, but sometimes we are meant to be ants, to move quietly, to carry what we can, to disappear without applause. The scholar was silent for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "Then, what is the meaning of such a life?" Ejo smiled. The same as any life, to live it. That spring, a child walking the path spotted a new colony of ants. Not in the same place, but close. She bent down to watch them. For minutes, she said nothing, only breathed, only witnessed. And then she placed a small stick beside their hole, so others would not step on it. She didn't know about the avalanche. She didn't know about Ijo's talk. She didn't need to. She had simply seen something small and chosen to care. There is a saying in the sutras, "No drop of water is wasted by the sea." To the cosmos, the ant may be dust, but to Dharma, even dust can reflect the light. The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. "But it's not. It's just light." Renji smiled. "Is your reflection in the mirror not you?" Kaoru hesitated. "I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me." "Then what is it?" he asked. "A copy," she guessed. Renji turned to her. "And what is your idea of yourself?" She blinked. "A reflection." Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop! The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. "Does the moon mind?" he asked. Kaoru laughed softly. "No." "Does the moon change?" "No," she said again. Renji looked at her gently. "Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not." That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, "I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth." The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. Only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, "What is real?" Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, "The moon and the water." She explained, "The moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth." The philosopher nodded slowly. "That is poetic, but how do you know it's true?" Kaoru looked up. "Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face." That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons. And the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, "Do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself." And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection, a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. In a quiet village by the sea, there lived an old potter. His hands were calloused from decades at the wheel. His workshop was small, bare walls, a low fire, and shelves filled with cups and bowls in every stage of becoming. People came from faraway towns to buy his pottery, not because it was flawless, but because it wasn't. Each piece had a tiny flaw, an uneven lip, a swirl in the glaze, a hairline crack sealed with gold. They were beautiful, but never perfect. One day, a student came to learn. She had steady hands, a precise eye, and a longing for perfection. The old potter gave her clay and pointed to the wheel. She worked hard, every day. Her bowls were smooth, her cups symmetrical, but the old man never praised them. She grew frustrated. "What am I doing wrong?" she asked. The potter picked up one of her perfect cups and held it to the light, then gently set it down. "Nothing," he said. "It's beautiful, but it does not speak." She blinked. "Speak?" He nodded. "True beauty, whispers of time, of change, of the hands that shaped it, of the cracks that taught it to hold." Then he handed her a chipped teacup, lined with a golden seam where the crack had been mended. "Look again," he said. And she did. The crack shimmered like morning light across water. It didn't ruin the cup. It revealed it. It gave it history. It made it whole in a different way. This is the heart of the teaching, wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection. The quiet wisdom of things that do not last. The grace of the incomplete. In Japanese tradition, broken pottery is not discarded. It is repaired with kintsugi, a lacquer mixed with gold or silver, not to hide the break, but to honor it, to say, this too is part of the story. Buddhism speaks of impermanence, anicca, as one of the three marks of existence. Everything that arises passes. Everything that is born changes. Everything we love will one day break. And that truth is not meant to depress us. It is meant to wake us up. To love something fragile is not foolish. It is courageous. To drink from a cracked teacup, knowing it may not last another year, is to say, this moment matters, because it will not come again. The student learned slowly. She stopped trying to make perfect pieces. She let the clay wobble, let the glaze drip, let the firing crack a rim now and then, and when it did, she filled it with gold. One afternoon, she brought the potter a cup she had broken by accident. She expected him to scold her, but he smiled. "Ah," he said, "now it begins." And together they repaired it, not to erase the break, but to bless it. Commentary: the cracked teacup is not about pottery. It is about you, about your heartbreaks, your failures, your aging skin, your tired hands, the things you thought made you less beautiful. Maybe the very things that make you most real, most whole, most you. We live in a culture obsessed with flawlessness, airbrushed images, filtered faces, words rehearsed until they lose their soul. But Buddhism invites us into a different gaze, a gaze that sees truth in the wrinkle, wisdom in the scar, grace in the stumble. You do not need to be flawless to be worthy. You do not need to hide your breaks. You only need to honor them. To say, yes, I cracked, but I learned how to hold more. There is an old saying, the wound is where the light enters you, but also the gold follows the fracture. Your pain is not shameful. It is precious because what you do with it, how you mend, how you carry yourself forward, that is your art. The next time something breaks, a plate, a plan, a piece of your confidence, pause, take a breath, gather what remains, and ask, how can I make this whole again? Not by hiding the crack, but by letting it shine. You are the cup, and you are also the gold. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In a mountainside monastery carved from stone and silence, there lived a monk known for his rage. He was not a novice, not undisciplined, not cruel, but when the fire came, it came fast, like wind through dry leaves, like lightning on still water. His name was Anjun. Years before, he had left behind a life of status and noise. A wealthy merchant's son, he had walked away from gold, from servants, from praise. He shaved his head, took the robe, entered the path, and tried to be still. But stillness did not come easily. Not for him. While other monks sat like stones in meditation, Anjun's thoughts raced. While others bowed gently in morning light, his mind bristled at small slights, careless words, slow movements. He clenched his teeth, gripped his mala beads too tightly, snapped at those who asked too many questions, and always afterward, he regretted it. One morning, a young monk accidentally spilled tea on his robes. Anjun stood. His voice rose like thunder in the sacred hall. "You call this mindfulness?" The novice bowed deeply, trembling, but the damage had been done. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. That evening, the abbot summoned Anjun. He did not scold, did not instruct. He simply handed Anjun a small, empty bowl. "Hold this," he said, and walk to the old pine tree at the edge of the cliff. Sit there until the bowl is full. Anjun blinked. "The bowl is empty." The abbot nodded. "Fill it with stillness." So Anjun went. The pine tree stood crooked against the sky, its needles sharp as whispers, its trunk weathered by time. Anjan sat beneath it, bowl in lap, confusion in heart. How could he fill a bowl with something that couldn't be seen? Hours passed. Birds called. Clouds shifted. His legs ached. Still the bowl remained, empty. Still his thoughts churned. This is foolish. I should be studying. They're laughing at me back at the monastery. The fire stirred again, that old familiar heat. He stood up, ready to leave, but paused, and for the first time, he looked at the bowl, at the tree, at the sky opening quietly beyond the cliffs, and something softened, not a release, but a noticing that his mind was loud and the world was not. He sat again, not to succeed, not to prove, but just to be. Days passed. He returned each morning, sometimes with anger, sometimes with peace, sometimes with tears, always with the bowl. He began to notice his breath, not control it, just notice. He began to feel his thoughts, not as commands, but as weather. They came, they went. One day, a beetle crawled across the bowl's rim. Anjan did not flinch, did not swat it away. He watched it, felt its tiny weight, its gentle effort, and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks later, he returned to the abbot. The bowl was still empty, but his eyes were not. They were clear, software still. The abbot smiled. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Anjan bowed. "I did not fill the bowl with stillness, but I emptied it of everything else." This is the story of the angry monk, and how fire, when met with space, becomes warmth. Commentary. Anger is not evil. It is energy. It is fire. And fire can cook food or burn down temples. The Dharma does not teach suppression. It teaches transformation. Anjan did not erase his anger. He sat with it. He saw its roots: fear, pride, expectation, and in seeing it clearly, he softened. You cannot calm your mind by force. You cannot force a bowl to fill with stillness. You can only stop stirring the water and wait until clarity returns on its own. We all carry bowls, and we all try to fill them with achievement, with reaction, with rightness, with control, but the wisest among us know. The real work is emptying, not to lose, but to make space. There's a Zen saying, "Let go or be dragged." You don't have to destroy your fire. Just give it space. Let it breathe. Let it teach you what stillness really means. And remember, stillness does not mean absence of movement. It means absence of resistance. Like a tree that sways but does not break. Like a bowl that reflects the sky because it does not try to. Let your bowl be empty. And in that emptiness, find peace. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tall holder, just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened, its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life." A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, the flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, 'Better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness.' But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises." In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker. Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary. The Candle and the Wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft, and lit, even when the conditions shift. Even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same. But sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, "I am still here." The teacher once said, "A candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. So be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are." The leaves whispered of him before his name ever reached a village gate. Parents clutched their children. Merchants rerouted their caravans. Monks bowed their heads, not in reverence, but in caution. for the man they called Angulimala roamed the forests like a curse in flesh. They said he wore a garland of severed fingers. They said he moved like wind through tall grass, too fast, too silent, too deadly. They said he had no soul, but the truth was more complicated. He had once been Ahimsaka, a child born to a noble Brahmin family, gentle, studious, with a heart like spring water, clear, eager, pure. His name meant harmless, and for a time it fit. His parents glowed with pride. His teachers praised his mind. He recited texts with ease and never raised his voice. He walked the sacred path with reverence. But even gardens grow shadows, and in the heart of his teacher, a master once kind, jealousy stirred like embers beneath calm. What if this boy outshines me? What if he is remembered while I am forgotten? And so, the poison was planted. Whispers behind closed doors. Lies dropped like oil into water. The teacher turned the other students against Ahimsaka. Then, turning to the boy himself, he spoke. If you truly wish to complete your training, bring me a gift. 1,000 lives, 1,000 fingers. Ahimsaka was horrified, but loyalty ran deep, and confusion deeper still. His world, once steady, spun sideways. The teachings twisted, the compass lost. And so he walked into the forest, heart trembling, mind clouded. At first, he resisted. Then, he rationalized. Then, he obeyed. One by one, lives fell. One by one, fingers were taken. He strung them on a garland around his neck, not out of pride, but as proof. A grotesque tally, a vow he could not break. Ahimsaka was gone. Only Angulimala remained. Years passed. Villages emptied at the sound of his approach. No warrior could stop him. No plea could reach him. He lived in the trees like a demon, fed by fear, haunted by silence. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the river and weep, not loudly, not dramatically, just a single, soundless shudder, as if his soul still remembered what it used to be. Then came the day everything changed. A new rumor reached the region. A monk in saffron robes was walking the land, barefoot and alone, unarmed, unafraid. His presence turned swords to dust. His gaze stilled storms. The Buddha. Angulimala laughed when he heard it. Let him come, he said. Let me take his finger too. And so he waited. It was mid-morning when the figure appeared, walking slowly along the forest path, robe brushing the grass, eyes lowered, bowl in hand. No fear, no hesitation. Angulimala stepped out from the trees, blade drawn. But the monk did not stop, nor did he hurry, just walked. Calm, present, silent. Something in Angulimala snapped. With a roar he charged. The earth pounded beneath him. His breath came wild. His blade glinted in the sun. But no matter how fast he ran, the monk remained just ahead, neither speeding up nor slowing down, until suddenly he stopped and turned. Their eyes met. The forest held its breath. Angulimala's chest heaved. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop walking!" And the Buddha spoke, calm, clear, eternal. "I have already stopped. Angulimala, it is you who has not. The words hit harder than any weapon. Stopped! The monk had stopped? Angulimala blinked. What do you mean? I have stopped chasing harm, stopped feeding the fires of anger, greed, and ignorance. But you still run. Angulimala lowered his sword. Not all the way, just a little, but enough. What should I do? And the Buddha stepped closer, unshaken, unarmed, unafraid. Drop the weapon, he said, and follow. For a long moment, Angulimala stood frozen. The forest was silent. Even the wind waited. Then, with trembling hands, the man removed the garland from his neck. Each finger clattered to the ground, like a lifetime falling apart. He dropped the sword and fell to his knees. I don't know how to walk your path, he whispered. The Buddha extended a hand, not to lift, but to witness. You already have, he said. The townspeople were outraged. When word spread that Angulimala, the killer, the terror, the demon of the forest, had become a monk, they rioted. They threw stones at him as he walked. They spat at his feet. They demanded his blood. But he did not strike back. He carried his bowl. He bowed when struck. He sat in silence and wept again, but not for himself. For them, one day after a particularly violent outburst from the crowd, he returned to the monastery bruised and bleeding. The Buddha looked at him, eyes deep as sky. You endure much, Angulimala. Angulimala bowed his head. I deserve it. The past is a shadow, the Buddha said. It follows you until you stop turning to chase it. One morning, he heard a woman crying in labor outside the village. The pain was great, the danger greater, but the people refused to help. She's cursed, they whispered. Her child will be born into blood. Angulimala stepped forward. I will go. The villagers gasped. You, the murderer, you'll curse her. But he walked past their fear and knelt beside the woman. His voice was soft. By the truth I now live, by the harm I have abandoned. May you and your child be safe. And she was. The birth was clean, the child strong. From that day, the whispers began to change. Years later, the man once known as Angulimala became a teacher of peace. He lived quietly. He sat often. He spoke gently. Children no longer feared him. Old men bowed to him. Mothers called upon him for blessings. But he never forgot the garland, never forgot the sword. They were not trophies. They were reminders of how far a man can fall and how far a soul can rise. When his final day came, it was quiet. The monks gathered near. He sat upright, as always, in meditation. He did not cry, did not call out. He simply exhaled, one long, peaceful breath, and let go. And in that final stillness, the forest that once whispered his name in fear, now whispered something else, forgiveness. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him, always responsive, always ready, always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction, a warning like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP-IS. By 4 p.m., his eyes burned. By 6 p.m., he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m., room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed, greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. "Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all." Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes it's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen?" Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly, because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. The midday sun beat down on the monastery grounds, turning the stone paths warm beneath bare feet. A hush lingered under the mango trees, broken only by the soft sweep of a broom or the distant cry of a minor bird. Somewhere in the distance, a pot clinked gently on a wash stone. It was the kind of afternoon that invited stillness. Under the spreading shade of a salad tree, the Buddha sat. His robes were folded neatly, his spine straight yet effortless. His gaze lowered, not in sleep or withdrawal, but in alert peace, like the surface of a quiet pond. From the southern walkway came Malunka, a young monk with a troubled brow. He had once been praised for his intellect, admired for the sharpness of his reasoning. But in recent months, that sharpness had turned inward. Each meditation left him with more questions than silence. He dreamed of stars, of time looping backward, of endless rebirths and impossible beginnings. He had filled scrolls with inquiries. He debated with scholars until his throat ached. But peace never came. And so today, he came to the Buddha. He bowed low. "Blessed One," he said, "I have questions." The Buddha did not speak immediately, but his silence was not dismissive. It was a space, an invitation. Malunka hesitated, then stepped forward. "Is the universe eternal?" he asked. "Is it infinite? Will a Buddha exist after death or vanish like smoke? Is the soul bound or free? Is the world self-created or born of design?" Each question emerged like a stone cast into a well, sharp, fast, echoing. The Buddha remained quiet. Malunka's face tightened. "Why will you not answer me?" he asked. "Are these not worthy questions? Are we not seekers of truth?" The Buddha looked up. His gaze was soft but steady. The other monks nearby paused in their work and drew closer, sensing the moment. The Buddha spoke. "Let me tell you a story. There was once a man," he said, "who was struck by a poisoned arrow in battle. The wound was deep. The poison spread quickly. His friends and family rushed to bring a healer. But the man, gasping, objected. "Before I allow treatment," he said, "I must know who shot me. Was he a nobleman or a laborer? What was his clan? Where was he born? What kind of bow did he use? Long or short? What wood was it carved from? What was the arrow's length? The feathers? Were they peacock or eagle? What poison did he use, and who taught him?" The monks chuckled, some hiding smiles behind folded hands. But the Buddha's gaze didn't waver. While the man demanded these answers, he died. He turned fully toward Malunka. "Would you call that man wise?" Malunka lowered his head, chastened. "No, Blessed One." The Buddha continued, his voice like slow water. "We are each struck by the arrow of suffering, pain, aging, death. The urgent question is not what lies beyond the river, but how to stop the bleeding, how to live with clarity now. We must remove the arrow before the poison spreads too far." Malunka stood in stillness. The breeze lifted the hem of his robe. His hands, once clenched, softened at his sides. "But don't those other questions matter?" he asked. "Aren't they part of the path?" "They may," the Buddha said, "but only after the wound is tended. Theories are branches, but we must first tend to the root. The Dharma is not meant to entertain the mind, it is meant to free it." The young monk exhaled. For years he had studied commentaries, argued with visiting teachers, sought certainty in logic and definition. But now he saw the arrow was still in him, and each speculative thought, each metaphysical obsession, had only twisted it deeper. That night, Malunka did not return to the library. He sat by the monastery's stone well and watched the moon ripple in the water. He did not write. He did not speak. He simply breathed, slowly, honestly. For the first time, he noticed the weight in his chest, not as a puzzle, but as pain. In the morning, he returned to the Buddha. He bowed deeply, forehead touching earth. "Blessed One," he said, "I no longer ask if the universe is eternal. I ask how to meet this moment without fear." The Buddha smiled. "That is the first step." And from that moment forward, Malunka's practice changed. He spoke less, listened more. When new monks asked abstract questions, he did not dismiss them. He simply asked, "Is this question healing you or delaying your healing?" Word of the exchange traveled. Soon, the story of the poisoned arrow spread, not as a rebuke of knowledge, but as a reminder of urgency. In a village struck by drought, a farmer mourned his ruined fields. His hands trembled with anger. "Why has fate cursed me?" he asked his neighbors. "Why was I born here and not in richer soil? Who sinned in a past life to bring this?" But then he remembered the story of the arrow. He sat beneath his withered tree and whispered, "How can I help my family now?" And the answer came quietly, "Begin digging a well." In a riverside town, a mother wept for her daughter, taken by fever. She begged the heavens for a sign, wondered what sins she had committed, questioned every past decision. But the village priest, who had once trained as a monk, told her the story. That night, she held her daughter's shawl and lit a lamp in silence, not to understand fate, but to honor love. Elsewhere, a scholar stood before a crowd, reciting theories about the soul's origin and whether consciousness survives death. In the back row, a quiet boy raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "have you removed your arrow yet?" The crowd fell still. The scholar did not answer. He returned to his room that night and sat without books for the first time in years. The Buddha never forbade questions. He welcomed inquiry. But he offered a compass, not a cage. He simply asked, "Will this question free you? Or bind you? Will it heal your wound? Or distract you from the blade still buried?" That became the measure. And so the monks learned not just what to ask, but when to ask and why, because the arrow is real. The pain is now. The wound is not a theory, and the first task, before philosophy, before argument, before metaphysics, is to pull it out, not later, not after you name the wood, not once you've traced its lineage, but now. The young monk spoke with confidence. He had studied for years. He had memorized the sutras, debated the Dharma, written essays on emptiness and non-self. Now he stood before Master Obaku, hoping to impress him. "What is the ultimate truth of Buddhism?" he asked, bowing low. The question was polished, prepared, even reverent. But Obaku said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and shouted, loud, sudden, like thunder cracking a still lake. The monk stumbled backward, heart racing. His thoughts vanished. His pride scattered like startled birds, and for a moment, just one brief, breathless moment, his mind stopped. No questions, no answers, just space, raw and awake. That was the lesson. A shout. Not of anger, but of compassion. Not to belittle, but to break. To shatter the walls of thinking that separate seeker from truth. In the Zen tradition, this is known as katsu, a fierce cry. a single wordless eruption that pierces through the mind's constant noise. Obaku used it like a blade, not to wound, but to cut away illusion, to jolt the student out of the fog of thought. Because sometimes you don't need more understanding, you need a wake-up call. Think of a dream. You're walking through it, believing it, responding to it. Then someone shouts your name. You jolt awake and realize none of it was real. Obaku's shout was like that, not a teaching, a waking. Years later, the monk returned. He bowed before Obaku and said, "I finally understand why you shouted." Obaku smiled and said, "Then forget that I ever did." Because even the memory of awakening can become another concept, another prison. Zen cuts not just through delusion, but through the attachment to insight itself. Obaku was a teacher of few words, but when he spoke or shouted, he struck deep. Once another student asked him, "What is the path to liberation?" Obaku raised his fist. The student said nothing, then bowed, because in that moment he understood. The path was this: not words about liberation, but the raw, silent, direct presence of the fist before him. Western minds often recoil from this. We're trained to expect kindness to be soft, truth to be calm, teachers to be gentle. But in Zen, compassion doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it roars, because the cage of the thinking mind is strong, and it takes a powerful noise to break it. Obaku's shout was not personal, it was not performance. It was pure action, free from hesitation, free from agenda. A sound that came from no self, and landed in the heart like a bell. Another story is told. A monk was dozing off during meditation. Obaku walked behind him, raised his staff, and struck the ground beside him, hard. The monk jolted upright, eyes wide. The master said only, "If you sleep through life, you will dream of Zen, but never wake to it." The monk bowed. He never fell asleep in the hall again. These moments are not cruel. They are kindness without comfort, because comfort can lull us into dreaming. But Zen is the practice of waking, again and again, until waking becomes your natural state, until presence is all you need. Imagine someone drowning in shallow water. You don't throw them a book about swimming. You pull them up, sometimes roughly, but always with love. That is Obaku's shout, a hand reaching through illusion, grabbing you by the robe and saying, "Wake up." Commentary. Not all teachings arrive gently. Some arrive like a storm, like cold water to the face, like a sound so loud it shakes the thoughts out of your spine. Because truth is not fragile. It doesn't need to be whispered. It just needs to be heard. And often the most compassionate thing a teacher can do is stop trying to explain and simply interrupt. Interrupt the story. Interrupt the me. Interrupt the years of polite ego dressed up as spirituality. Obaku knew this. He wasn't teaching Buddhism, he was teaching freedom. And sometimes freedom begins not with understanding, but with a single sharp, sacred shout. If you walk away from Zen with nothing but quotes, you've missed it. If you remember the stories but never felt the cut, you're still dreaming. But if something within you, some soft center you didn't know you had, felt this story not as words, but as thunder, then maybe, just maybe, you've begun to wake up. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. It is said there was once a monk who lived alone in a crumbling hut on the edge of a forgotten village. His robes were patched, his alms bowl was cracked. His sandals made no sound on the stone path. He spoke little, taught no students, carried no scrolls. But people said strange things happened when they met him. A merchant who had been cruel to his workers walked by the hut and wept for no reason. A mother carrying grief for her lost child said the monk looked at her once, and the grief melted into the wind. When asked what he taught, the villagers would shrug and say, "He says only this: there is light, even in darkness." The hidden light. It is one of the most mysterious and profound teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, because it does not promise that suffering will end quickly. It does not say life will be easy. It says only, there is something in you, deeper than pain, stronger than shame, more real than your confusion. It is called Buddha nature, and it exists in all beings. Not just the gentle ones, not just the wise ones, but also in the angry man gripping the bar, in the prisoner lying in silence, in the girl who cuts herself and hides the blade, in the addict, in the abuser, in the one we condemn. The light does not go out. It can be buried, forgotten, covered in ash, but never extinguished. There's a story in the Mahayana scriptures. A group of disciples sat with the Buddha and asked, "Master, does everyone have Buddha nature?" And the Buddha said, "Even this dog has it." The disciples frowned. The dog scratched, barked, chased shadows. But the Buddha saw beyond behavior. He saw the seed, the stillness beneath the noise, the jewel in the dirt. Imagine a gold statue wrapped in rags, sealed in clay, buried for centuries. No one knows it's there, but if you chip away the layers, the gold shines. That is the self, not something to create, something to uncover. We live in a world that measures worth by action. We say, prove you're good, show you're worthy, earn your place. But the Dharma says, you are already whole. Now act in a way that honors that. There's another story. A monk once asked a teacher, if everyone has Buddha nature, why do they act with greed and hatred? The teacher pointed to a clear pool. He picked up a stick and stirred the mud at the bottom. The water turned cloudy. Is the clarity gone? The teacher asked. No, said the monk. It's just hidden. Exactly, the teacher replied. Wait long enough and it will return. The path, then, is not about becoming something new. It is about becoming familiar with what has always been true. About seeing through the layers. Not pushing them away, but noticing. This fear is a layer. This craving is a layer. This story I tell myself that I am broken, unworthy, lost, is a layer. And underneath, stillness, light. You. Some people fear this teaching. They say, if everyone has Buddha nature, what about evil? But Mahayana Buddhism does not excuse harm. It reveals the tragedy behind it. It says, this one too was once innocent. This one too has a light they forgot. This one too is capable of awakening. Not as an excuse, but as a possibility. When you see others through this lens, something shifts. The one who hurt you still hurt you. But now, they are more than that. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you see clearly, because you do not want your own light dimmed by hatred, because you too want to be free. Commentary. To believe in Buddha nature is not to be naive. It is to have the deepest possible faith in what cannot be destroyed. Even by trauma, even by war, even by your own worst mistake. It is the faith that says, there is gold under the clay, even if I've forgotten it, even if no one else sees it, even if I don't yet know how to reach it. The monk in the crumbling hut. He had nothing, but he saw the light in everyone. And so people came, not to learn doctrine, but to be seen, to be reminded, to be held in the quiet truth that nothing in them was beyond repair. Maybe that's your task today, not to fix yourself, but to pause, to breathe, to ask, what if there's still light here? And then, to live from that place, even if no one else understands, even if the robe still feels heavy, because the moment you remember, you become the reminder. In the town of Rajagaha, nestled among ridges of stone and mist, the streets curled like vines through hills and markets. Every morning, as the sun brushed gold across tiled rooftops, the air came alive with the calls of merchants, the ring of temple bells, and the mingling scents of tamarind, burning incense, and warm, sweet rice. Life here was orderly, rhythmic, a blend of mountain silence and city song. But lately, that rhythm had broken, not from plague, not from drought, but from something deeper, more primal. Fear, not fear of armies or kings, but of a creature, Nalagiri, a bull elephant so massive that earth seemed to lean under his step. Captured from the wild mountains of the north, Nalagiri had been kept in the royal stables since he was young. Once a proud spirit, free to roam cliffs and bathe in wild rivers, now he was shackled day after day, year after year. The weight of captivity grew inside him like fire trapped in stone. He grew restless, then bitter, then dangerous. Stable boys quit, guards were replaced, chains grew thicker. Nalagiri's cries echoed through the stone halls like thunder rolling through empty skies. The people of Rajagaha whispered that madness had taken him, but not all feared him. One man saw an opportunity in that rage. Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, a monk by appearance, but a storm beneath the robes, jealous of the Buddha's calm, his followers, his truth. Devadatta sought power, not peace. And when his teachings could not rival the Buddha's, he plotted instead. He went to King Ajatashatru, young and proud, his rule still soft around the edges, and he leaned close. "Let Nalagiri loose," he whispered. "Aim him at the Buddha. See what becomes of silent wisdom when tusks meet flesh." The king, tempted by spectacle or swayed by flattery, agreed. And so, one morning, before the city had fully woken, the iron gate to Nalagiri's pen creaked open. Chains were undone. Commands were given. The path was cleared. Nalagiri stepped forward, eyes wide, breath steaming, mind ablaze. He charged through market streets, through cloth stalls and fruit carts, scattering baskets and lives. People screamed, children ran, dogs howled and carts overturned. He did not walk. He tore the world open beneath him. And down that path, barefoot, cloaked in saffron robes, carrying only his alms bowl, walked the Buddha. No guards, no weapons, no rush in his step, just presence. His disciples shouted from behind walls and corners, "Lord, turn back, the elephant comes, he will crush you." But the Buddha kept walking, not with recklessness, not with pride, but with compassion so still it could hold a mountain. As Nalagiri approached, the air thickened with heat and tension. His tusks gleamed, his trunk coiled like a whip. His roar shattered the morning hush. Mothers shielded their children, merchants fell to the ground. The entire city held its breath, but the Buddha stood. The elephant thundered toward him. The ground trembled, and then stillness. The Buddha raised his eyes and looked. He looked not at a beast, not at a weapon, but at a being in pain. He saw the chains, the years, the sorrow turned to rage. He saw the hunger for freedom twisted into madness. He saw a heart once wild, now broken by cruelty. And in his gaze, he held no fear, no judgment, only recognition. As Nalagiri neared, mere strides away from trampling the man before him, he met that gaze, and something changed. The wind quieted, the air cooled. The fire in Nalagiri's eyes flickered. He slowed, then paused. His ears twitched, his breathing hitched. He took one more step, then stopped. The Buddha stepped forward. Slowly, gently, one hand raised, not to strike, not to shield, but to bless. And Nalagiri knelt. He folded his legs beneath him, lowered his head like a branch under rain. A great groan, half sigh, half sorrow, escaped his chest. And there, in the middle of the street where rage had once ruled, the Buddha placed his hand on Nalagiri's brow. Not with domination, but with presence. And the elephant wept. Tears pooled beneath his eyes, streaking down the folds of his face, darkening the dust. His trunk coiled softly around the Buddha's arm, no longer as a weapon, but as a gesture of surrender. The city watched in stunned silence. The same elephant who shattered stone fences and snapped trees now sat like a disciple at the feet of peace. Devadatta, watching from the shadows of a colonnade, said nothing. His plot, like a snake uncoiled, had slithered away, not with defeat by force, but by a truth too gentle to resist. Later, when the sun rose fully and the city slowly exhaled, Nalagiri returned to the royal grounds, but no longer was he led by whip or chain. He walked slowly, willingly, like a monk returning from alms. The Buddha returned to his seat beneath a banyan tree, his bowl untouched, his robe still bright. And the people came. They came not to celebrate a miracle, but to understand a lesson. They asked, "How did you stop him?" And the Buddha replied, "Anger cannot be conquered by anger, but by love alone. Fear cannot be silenced by force, but by understanding. The wildness in others is often the cry of suffering, not wickedness." And so it was taught that true strength is not in the fist, not in the sword, but in the heart that stays open in the face of danger. The tale of Nalagiri passed from lips to scrolls, from scrolls to temples, from temples to time itself. Children would ask their mothers, "Is it true that the Buddha tamed the elephant?" And they would answer, "Yes, my child, but not with magic, with seeing. Seeing the pain in others, seeing the fear beneath fury, seeing the being behind the mask, and meeting it with love." Nalagiri lived out his days not as a beast of burden, but as a gentle giant, offering rides to children, watering temple gardens with his trunk, and standing calmly when the monks recited sutras beneath the trees. It is said that when he died, the earth grieved gently, and his spirit rose unchained. Some believe Nalagiri was reborn in a heavenly realm. Others say he was reborn among the disciples. But all agree on this, that in the still gaze of one awakened man, an ocean of rage was calmed, not by war, but by peace itself. It is said that after his awakening under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha sat in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because no words could contain what he saw. The world shimmered before him like a dew-covered web catching the morning light. Everything, every leaf, every breath, every thought was connected, not metaphorically, not poetically, but truly. And so, in that first silent gaze, the Avatamsaka Sutra was born, not as speech, but as vision, a vast radiant vision of interbeing. Imagine this: a net stretches across the cosmos, infinite in all directions. At each knot of the net, there is a jewel, and in each jewel, the entire net is reflected. Every other jewel, every other reflection. No part is separate. No jewel exists on its own. This is Indra's net, one of the core images in the Avatamsaka Sutra. It is not a fantasy. It is how reality is structured. Everything contains everything. You are a jewel in the net. So is the ant beneath your foot. So is the person you haven't forgiven. So is the star pulsing light from 10 billion years ago. Each one reflects all, and when one moves, all are changed. This is not romanticism. It is truth seen from beyond the ego. In the Avatamsaka, it is said that a single moment of insight can contain the entire Dharma, and a single grain of sand can reveal all Buddhas, because nothing is just itself. A drop of water is also the cloud, the river, the ocean, the drought, the cry of thirst, the hand that turns on the tap. All these are not separate events. They are expressions of one great dance. There's a story told from the sutra. The Bodhisattva Sudhana travels in search of awakening. He visits 52 teachers. Each one shows him a different truth. A sailor, a child, a gardener, a courtesan, a beggar, a monk. Not one has the final answer, because in this vision there is no final answer. There is only deepening, broadening, the ever-widening ripple of understanding that you are not apart from anything, not even from the question. In the end, Sudhana meets Samantabhadra, who tells him, the path is infinite, the practice is the vision is you. And in that moment, Sudhana realizes he was never seeking something out there. He was walking through his own reflection. If you truly see this just once, you can never hate again in the same way. Because to harm another is to harm yourself. To lift another is to lift all. You do not have to understand the whole net. You only have to touch one jewel, a single act of kindness, a single moment of stillness, a single breath where you choose love over fear, that one act changes everything. Because the net responds, because you are not alone, because no wave rises by itself. Commentary. The Avatamsaka Sutra is sometimes called the flower ornament scripture because it reveals the beauty of reality as it is, not flat, not linear, but multidimensional, like a lotus unfolding endlessly in every direction. In our daily lives, we feel separate. I am here, you are there, this is mine, that is yours. But this is illusion, a necessary illusion perhaps, but illusion nonetheless. Reality is interpenetration. You are in me, I am in you. Even now, reading these words, your breath carries the oxygen once exhaled by trees that died 1,000 years ago. Your thoughts are shaped by your grandmother's voice, by books written by strangers, by the laughter of a friend you no longer speak to. Even your loneliness is shared, because someone else right now feels it too. This is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to free you, because when you understand interconnection, you do not have to do everything. You only have to do something and trust that it matters. Because it does, because the net responds. A Zen teacher once said, "When a bird sings on one branch, the whole forest awakens." You may be that bird, you may be the branch, or the silence that follows. Each one is essential. Each one reflects the whole. You are not small, you are a jewel in the net, reflecting everything, and being reflected by everything. So polish your jewel, not for glory, but for others, because the clearer you become, the clearer the whole web shines. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.